Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to America once again, and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once or twice before. Now, the last beer that I reviewed from these guys came onto the channel in about 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and that was a really nicely done beer. These guys, from what I understand, are a very well respected brewery in their home state and further afield across the US, but because I don't come into contact with them all that often, it's a little bit difficult for me to say what styles this brewery is best known for. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a style that I know this brewery can do very well. It's also a kind of amped up version of the beer that I tried from them a few years back, and as I say, I was very impressed with that one, and this one I'm sure will be like putting that beer on steroids, to be quite honest with you. This one seems to have very good ratings, and it was given to me by someone I know really knows what they're talking about when it comes to beer. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys watching enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to the state of Michigan, which is to the north of Chicago, kind of about a third of the way across America from the East Coast, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to go to a little place in that state called Holland, which is to the southwest of Grand Rapids, quite close to the coast on the western side, about halfway up, and that means that we're going to have a look at another beer from the wonderful New Holland Brewing Company. So this particular beer is Dragon's Milk Triple Mash. It comes in at 17% ABV, so it is a little bit of a monster, and this one is a bourbon barrel-aged triple mash Imperial Stout. Now, that is not something you come across all that often, and it's not something to be taken lightly, but we did try one of the original Dragon's Milk beers on the channel from these guys back in, as I say, 2019 or something like that, and that was really very good. So I'm really curious to see what this kind of on steroids version of that beer is going to be like. But in this video I have to give a massive shout out and thank you to Jesse Holden. I'm pretty sure this is a beer that he gave me when I visited the Chicago area in May or so of 2019. He picked out some really nice stuff and gave that to me to take home, and I thought, you know, it'd be really cool to keep this one for the 10th anniversary of the channel. So this is a continuation of my Crazy Beers for 10 Years mini-series that I've been doing for you over the last few videos, and I hope that you guys incidentally are enjoying this. But yeah, this one I think should be a bit of a monster. 17% triple mash Imperial Stout bourbon barrel aged. So yeah, let's crack on with this one and see how we get on. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from New Holland Brewing Company before, and we will hopefully add some more to that list in the near future. I'll need to talk to Jesse about that because I know he loves this brewery and he can probably get a hold of some really crazy stuff for me. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support that you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer using the geography tagging system. So just go in there, use the little search bar, put in your hometown, state, county, whatever you like. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the American playlist along with a number of other things, and we are adding to that list whenever the opportunity arises. But yeah, check out the playlist of beers from other countries as well. There's some really interesting stuff out there. But let's go on and chat a little bit about New Holland Brewing Company then for this video. So, brewery note time. So, New Holland Brewing Company, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Holland in Michigan, and the company was founded back in 1996 by Jason Spalding and Brett Vanderkamp. So Jason and Brett had grown up together in Midland in Michigan, and then they both attended Hope College and got involved in home brewing together. But after they finished university, they drew up a business plan and found investors, and then founded their brewery officially in 1996. They were joined a little bit later on by Dave White in 1997, who also attended Hope College, and he specialised in restaurant and pub management. And over the following years, they continued to develop new recipes and got their beers out there a little bit more and built up the brewery infrastructure. But Jason Spalding left New Holland Brewing in 2005 and went on to found Vivint Brewing Company in Grand Rapids, mainly because he felt that he didn't want the hassles of having a big commercial brewery. But Fred Boiltman came in as a partner in the company, and he was installed as head of branding and marketing. But in 2005, these guys began distilling whiskey, rum and gin, and this went on sale initially in 2008. But by 2006, the brewery side of the business was producing around 600,000 litres of beer per year, and then about 10 years later, by 2015, they were producing 35,000 hectolitres per year in 3 locations in Holland and Grand Rapids. But they have their original brew pub, which is called the New Holland Pub in Holland. They've got the Kickerbocker Pub, in Grand Rapids, and then another brew pub in Battle Creek, as well as 2 spirit tasting rooms in Saugatuck and South Haven, all of which are, of course, in Michigan. But today these guys are producing in the region of 60,000 hectolitres of beer per year, and as of July 2023, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced 530 different kinds of beer according to Untappd. From what I understand, the Dragon's Milk has been launched as its kind of own brand. If you go and actually look at the Dragon's Milk website, you can see that there's a bunch of different versions of the Dragon's Milk now, including this one, the Triple Mash. There's several different vintages of this, of course, as well, but there is the Dragon's Milk Bourbon Whiskey and things like that too, which is quite interesting to see. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of draw the line between New Holland Brewing Company and Dragon's Milk these days, but yeah, they obviously are very interconnected. But yeah, for me, this one, it says on the top here, it's New Holland Brewing Company, so that's what we're going to put as the title of the video. But yeah, that is everything that I can really tell you about the brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all of the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, I think we can go on and actually have a little look at this beer itself. So I'll let you have a wee look at the artwork on this one before we open up. This has of course changed a little bit because this bottle was this bottle was made back in 2019, so we're on the 2023 vintage of the Dragon's Milk Triple Mash just now. So yeah, a little bit of a change in artwork compared with the modern one. There you can see New Holland Brewing Company on the little top label there, and you can see the Dragon's Milk New Holland bottle cap on this one too. It tells you a little bit on the back here. Triple Mash Dragon's Milk is aged in New Holland spirits, oak barrels. Intense malt character is paired with the toasted notes of American white oak. So yeah, it looks pretty nice, and I'll just let you have a wee look. There is another symbol for New Holland Brewing Company on the back of the bottle there. I'm not sure how well that's showing up on the camera, but yeah, as I say, it does look very nice, a very nicely presented bottle actually. I do have some more details on this beer actually in my notes as well. So as I said earlier, 17% Imperial Stout. It was first brewed, the original Dragon's Milk was brewed back in 2001, but this one is hopped with Nugget and Brewer's Gold, and it's got a malt base of 2-row Munich, caramel, crystal, black, chocolate and flaked barley malt. So yeah, the malt base in this is a bit of a beast, but at Triple Mash, this thing is going to be insanely high in terms of its gravity. At 17% ABV, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how crazy this beer actually is. But one of the things you always want to do when you barrel age a beer is compensate in the malt base for the loss of thickness and things, because whenever you barrel age a beer, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of the mouthfeel to get all these nice woody infused flavours. So that is worth bearing in mind. But you know, you can give stouts a longer wort boil to give you really complex kind of woody flavours, or you can you know, double up or triple up the mash in this case, and that'll give you these kind of big sticky flavours, if you like. Those are the two main things that you can do with this particular beer style. But let's get this guy out into the glass and see what it's all about. This is the 2019 vintage of the Dragon's Milk Triple Mash, a bourbon barrel aged triple mash Imperial Stout. Yeah, let's just do this. Again, a massive thank you to Jesse Holden, a long-term supporter of the channel, for making this review possible. And really cool to have a beer like this to try for the channel's 10th anniversary. Oh, that looks nice. Not much in the way of sedimentation in the bottle of this one, which is quite surprising considering how old the beer is. And you know, I've kept it pretty cold, to be honest with you. It's sat in my my garage, which is a nice moderated temperature. But yeah, before the head on this beer disappears, then you can see that it's poured with about a quarter to a 1/3 finger of a light, kind of fawn coloured head. That of course is fading away to be a really thin foamy layer, but you're just getting that ring kind of lingering around the edge of the glass there. But you can see the bubbles on the head there are kind of medium in size, but they're a little bit more foamy the further up that you go. But yeah, in terms of the colour of this beer, it is pretty much as you would expect from any Imperial Stout. If we shine the light through this one, I've just got the light sitting over here, it does have a little bit of that kind of Coca-Cola, Pepsi Max colour to it. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass there, but not too many. You can see there are a few bubbles just coming up toward the surface of the beer there. One or two little sediment particles floating around, but like I said, this beer didn't really have all that much in the way of sediment when we poured it, to be honest, which is surprising considering that it's been in the bottle 4 years and it's also a bourbon barrel aged thing. But yeah, remember the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts that you put into the beer will affect the colour of it too. But when it comes to black beers like Imperial Stouts, it's a bit difficult to affect the colour of the beer with barrel aging. You can do it a little bit more easily with like Doppelbocks, barley wines, quadruples, the brown beers basically. But yeah, not so much with the big black Imperial Stouts. I'm seeing more and more sediment and particle floating around in this one actually as I mentioned that, so that is definitely worth bearing in mind with this one. But in terms of what you would expect appearance wise from an Imperial Stout, there's not a lot surprising about this one, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, I don't think we need to say anything else about the appearance of the beer. Let's have a closer look at the aroma and just see how we get on with this one. Oh yeah, I'm going to say straight away, this is really damn good in terms of its aroma. These days, there's so much of a focus on there's so much of a focus on pastry stouts and things like that. You miss the older stouts like this that are a little bit more, kind of Russian Imperial Stout or Imperial Milk Stout. I really do miss those. I'm not the greatest fan of the kind of granola-y or marzipan type flavoured pastry stouts. I like the older Imperial Stouts that are a bit more roasty and toasted like a Russian Imperial Stout, or they're more kind of thick and smooth like an Imperial Milk Stout. And that, we're getting something in the middle of those two styles there with this one. But I will say straight away, this beer smells absolutely beautiful. Big and bold in its nose, and you know the barrel is really nicely mixed into this one, but it doesn't dominate, and that's what you want, to be honest with you. But let's just break the aroma of this beer down a little bit before we taste it and describe it a little bit more in depth. So, the backbone of this beer, it is absolutely that lovely smooth American oak. And as I've explained on the channel many a time before, for me, American oak is a different species of tree from European oak. American oak tends to be a lot smoother, and it has a little bit more of a kind of vanilla element to it in terms of aroma and flavour for me, in comparison with European oak, which is a little bit drier. So yeah, that's worth bearing in mind here. So the backbone of the beer here is obviously that smooth American oak. The bourbon that's coming out of this one for me is actually quite, the bourbon character is actually quite prominent, but it's quite a sweet bourbon. But I'm not overly familiar with bourbon. Being Scottish, of course, we don't get so much bourbon in my home country because, you know, we don't really need to. But bourbon for me has always been a lot sweeter than Scotch whisky, even the Speyside stuff, which tends to be the sweetest that we'll offer. So yeah, with this one you can smell the sweetness of the bourbon in there, but even this bourbon, even with my limited experience of bourbon, the bourbon notes that I'm getting off this beer are particularly sweet, I would say. Very slightly toasty, and they've got this kind of like fudgy Werther's Original type thing to them as well. So yeah, you've got the smooth American oak, you've got the little bit of vanilla in there, the sort of bourbon brown sugar sitting above that, and then you start to get the actual notes from the stout itself, and you can really smell that it's a mix of American and German malt in this one. Over the years I've developed a very sensitive nose and palate for noticing the differences between the American and German malts, but you can smell a little bit of that slightly roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust in this one. You get a lovely kind of sweet rye or pumpernickel type bread coming out of this one, maybe a little mix of both, to be quite honest with you. And then above that, you start to get this little bit of an almost like chocolate brownie, kind of chocolate muffin type quality coming out of the beer, which I think is really very nice. So yeah, above the kind of rye bready and wholemeal brown bready characteristics, you have this kind of chocolate muffin, chocolate brownie type character. And the chocolate for me is really interesting. Like further forward on the nose, you get a little bit of a milky chocolate type note, 30-40% cocoa, but further back you get a little bit darker than that, maybe 60-70% cocoa chocolate. And you'll find this on the palate too. The darker, more bitter flavours come out further back on the palate, the sweeter flavours come out further forward. But there's a lot of chocolate to this one. It's quite a sweet and oily chocolate, generally speaking, but you are getting a good little bit of brown sugar from the malty character too. So for me, there is quite a little bit of that treacle type note to this one, or molasses as the Americans would call it. There's a little bit of toasty brown sugar in there as well. Sweet caramel is quite obvious in this beer as well. One or two little nutty notes coming out of it the further you go into the aftertaste. But yeah, I think that's it almost has a little bit of an almost tobacco-y sweetness to it as well, this beer, come to think of it. But yeah, in terms of the aroma, this one, it's nothing particularly surprising, but it's when you consider the style, but it's just lovely. It really is just a very, very nice aroma that you get off of this one. So yeah, I think that goes together really quite nicely. I think that covers the malty and yeasty side of the aroma, to be honest with you. But in terms of the hoppy side of things in this beer, obviously Imperial Stouts are not the most hop forward styles of beers to begin with, but when you barrel age it and when you put a triple mash in it, you are going to focus on the malty side of things. So you're not going to get too much hoppy character from this beer regardless, but I do find you still have a little bit of hoppy character coming out of this one. There's a little touch of earthiness to it, there's a little bit of a herbal character, some floral notes, a little bit of grassiness in there, and yeah, a lot of that will have dropped out because the beer was barrel aged initially and it's also 4 years old, but you still pick up a little bit of remnant of that character in there, like I say. But then beyond that, you have a really nice fruity characteristic to this beer. For me, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. If we focus on that, there's like a juicy plummy type note to this one. There's definitely a more oily figgy character in there, and I would say that, you know, it has got a little bit of an almost like cakey note to it, like a like a Christmas puddingy type character. So you've got a little tiny touch of that phenolic-y type note coming out. But yeah, plums, fig, I want to say blackberry as well coming out of this beer. It really is lovely aroma-wise. I think this is very, very nice. So yeah, as I always say, take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of your beers before you get stuck into them. But I think it is about time that we taste this one. This is a proper old school American Imperial Stout in my mind. So yeah, this is the Dragon's Milk Triple Mash, a 17% triple mash bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout from New Holland Brewing Company in Holland, a little bit to the southwest of Grand Rapids in the western part of Michigan over in the US. Let's have a look at this one and see what it's all about. Huge thank you once again to Jesse Holden for making this review possible. But yeah, another crazy beer for 10 years of Rampant Lion Reviews. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Yeah, I'm going to say straight away, this thing is an absolute monster. It's just a beast. It's an absolute beast. There's so much flavour with this one. I tell you something, it gives you a hell of a bit of, you can feel down your chest cavity the booze in this one. Yeah, the boozy side of this beer is it's just crazy, to be honest with you. But I will say straight away, it is a really, really nicely done beer. It takes a wee bit of time for the boozy burn to actually come out of this one further down the chest, but flavour profile wise, it is, as soon as you take a sip of this beer, you're going to see exactly why it's so highly rated. I think it was like a 4.46 that it had when I had a little look on Untappd earlier. And for me, it finds a really good middle ground between like an Imperial Milk Stout and a Russian Imperial Stout, and it's because of the barrel aging and the fact that it's triple mash. Whenever you up the mash of the beer, it's always going to make it a little bit more sweet, to be honest with you. But yeah, this is really damn good. This is a very, very good beer. Yeah. Let's try and just break this one down then and describe the flavour for you a little bit more in depth, as we always do. We'll start on that middle third of the palate and we'll go from there. So you can feel that the backbone of this beer is absolutely that lovely, smooth American oaky character. So yeah, lovely smooth American oaky character coming out of this one in there. And you can feel the oaky character gets a little bit sweeter and smoother the further forward that you go. It has a little touch of, you do get a little bit more vanilla out of it the further forward on that middle third of the palate that you go. But then you have the kind of, on top of that, you've got the kind of bourbon spirit layer. And as I said, when I think about my very limited experience of American bourbon, it seems like quite a sweet bourbon. It's got a little bit of toasty dryness to it, in a sense. It's almost got a little bit like a honeycomb type flavour. But yeah, the bourbon character that comes out of this one for me, in the spirit layer above the wood, is very bright and very sweet, actually. But then above that, you start to get the flavours from the actual malt base of the stout. So you have a layer of like a roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust sitting there. And then it very quickly becomes a little bit more, I don't know if rye bread. Yeah, I think rye bread actually is the right descriptor there. So you've got roasty, above the bourbon layer, you've got roasty, toasty, well-fired bread crust, a bit of a rye bready character, and then there's another kind of wholemeal, sort of brown bready layer sitting above that. Within that wholemeal brown bready layer, you get a little touch of nuttiness. And then yeah, above the above that kind of wholemeal brown bready layer, you start to get, above the wholemeal kind of brown bready layer, you start to get this kind of chocolate brownie, chocolate muffin type layer. So there is another cakey layer above that, and you can feel that on the top of the cakey layer, you start to get the chocolatey notes. So if we go to the back of that middle third of your palate, you're getting a sort of 90% cocoa chocolate character there, and as you move further forward on the palate, it mellows out and gives you a sort of it does mellow out and it gives you a sort of more 60% cocoa chocolate, I think. Yeah, so it goes from 90% cocoa chocolate at the back to a kind of sweeter 60% cocoa chocolate further forward. And as I've said on the channel many times before, you have that general trend: more bitter and dry flavours come out further back on the palate, sweeter flavours come out further forward. But then above the chocolatey layer, you get a little bit of a toasty brown sugary note coming out of the beer. Then above that, you have a little bit more of a say, kind of, so you've got toasty layer. You do have a little bit more of that kind of leathery brown sugary character, and as I say, with Imperial Stouts, you can give them a longer wort boil and caramelise the sugars a bit more. It doesn't feel like that's the case in this one. I think this one is a low, a kind of shorter wort boil, but just triple mash, and you can kind of see that from the beer as well. It's not quite as hazy and things. With a longer wort boil, you tend to get a wee bit more haze to these kind of beers. But yeah, you do get a little bit of that leathery kind of brown sugary character. And then above that, in the dead centre of your palate, you can feel this little circle there where the alcohol character is kind of concentrating. You have this big treacly molasses type note coming out of the beer. So yeah, for me, the kind of treacly molasses note in the middle of the palate, the roasty, toasty dryness and stuff that comes out of this one, I think is it's really nice as well. The brown sugary characters go together really well in this one, and then yeah, you get that kind of nutty character that lingers there in the middle of the palate too. On that note, I think we've said everything we really can about that middle third of your palate, so we should move on to the back third of the palate. But what generally happens on the back third of the palate is you get similar flavours, but they just come out in different intensities. But we'll look at that. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you get a nice little bit of kind of bready build-up in there. So you've got a bit of an almost rye bready character in the base, a wholemeal brown bread, and then a little bit of chocolate muffin, chocolate brownie character above that. But yeah, the base of the back third of the palate, you've got a nice kind of, you do have a nice kind of woody base in there, which is great. So yeah, you can feel that the American oak, it's a little bit drier on that back third of the palate. You've got the spirit layer above that, which again feels a little bit drier. And then you have a little bit of above that kind of spirit layer, you do have a little bit more of you can get the rye bready layer, which feels a little bit more kind of light and airy. You've got the wholemeal brown bready layer, which again feels a little bit, or maybe more like a pumpernickel bread, which feels like a little bit lighter and airy than the wholemeal bread. And then you have a little bit of a cakey character just on the top. So you've got kind of 4 layers for me on that back third of your palate, which is really interesting. And above all of that, you can feel that there's a little bit of a, some of the kind of roasty, toasty, dry elements of the chocolate are just creeping over the top of that, and that forms the top of the back third of the palate. So yeah, I think that covers everything on the kind of malty side on the back third of your palate. But then above all of that, you've got some of the yeasty character coming out of the beer. So for me, The yeasty side of the beer in this one is like a really dense, sweet, brown bready character. It's kind of wrapped in honeycomb. I always get honeycomb on the back third of your palate on the yeasty side of the flavour for some reason. But there's a little bit of woodiness and nuttiness in there as well, which is really interesting to see. Yeah. But that's, for me, that's really interesting. The yeasty character gives you a bit more woodiness and graininess and stuff the further into the aftertaste that you go. But definitely on the back third of the palate you can feel the flavour is taller, and as you come further forward into the middle third. Alright guys, sorry about the cut there, camera just being silly, but as I was saying, the flavour on the back third of the palate is quite obviously, you know, taller, and you can feel that as you go further forward into that middle third of your palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together that little bit more. But yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things then on the edges of the palate, so for me, like I said earlier, a lot of the hoppy character will have dropped out of this one because it's barrel aged, and two because the bottle is just that little bit older, but you still get the remnants of a little bit of hoppiness in this beer, in my opinion at least. So yeah, in the back corners of the palate you do get a little bit of an earthy remnant there. And as you move further forward, it's got a little touch of herbal character, but as you push toward the front corners of the palate, you can feel that it gradually does get a little bit of floral aromaticity there, but then round the front curve of the palate, it's that little bit lighter and more grassy, I would say. But yeah, these flavours just add a little bit more depth to the beer. They're not overly prominent, but they are there and just contributing a little bit to what's going on with this one, and I do like how that goes together. But let's focus on the front third of your palate then, and the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you can feel that there's a little bit of bready build up in there. So you've got a little bit of rye bread in the base, a little bit of like a pumpernickel bread in the middle, and a wee bit of a wholemeal brown bread on top. But the base of that front third of your palate, it's got the lovely American smooth oak in there. You've got the lovely smooth American oak in there. Then above that you get the little bit of the bourbon sweetness, and then you start to get, for me, a mix of pumpernickel bread and a little bit of the kind of cakey dryness, and then you have that nice oily bubble where the fruity, juicy esters just kind of roll their way out of the beer. And the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting. The other thing I should say about that border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do actually get quite a little bit of, yeah, you do get a good little bit of, say, it has a little bit of this kind of phenolic quality to it, you know, that kind of thing that you get from, say, you know, like Belgian doubles, Belgian quadruples. That kind of, it's like a Christmas puddingy type flavour. There's a little bit of that sort of cakey sort of thing going on in the border region between front and middle third of your palate, as I said, and that lingers there. But then above all of that, on that back third of your palate, you get that nice kind of, or on that front third of your palate, sorry, above everything else, as you see, you get that nice oily bubble where the fruity, juicy esters roll their way out of the beer. So let's have a wee look at that. So yeah, when you take the beer in with this one, you get a lovely sort of, yeah, you get a lovely kind of, I would say, there's not so much a raisiny sharpness to this one, it's more along the lines of like a pruny character. At the back of that front third of your palate, it's very much like a prune type note. Then as you move further forward, you get more and more of that kind of phenolic-y, red fruity Christmas pudding sort of thing. So there's prunes in there, there's a little bit of fig, maybe a wee touch of like date or something like that. And then as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, you start to get a little bit more blackcurrant in the base and a little bit of blackberry on top. But you get a lot of, on that front third of your palate, you're getting a lot of dryness, I think. Yeah, like when you take the beer in, if you focus on that front third of your palate, you get a lot of fruitiness in there, so lovely kind of juicy fruity character, as I say. Yeah, lovely big kind of juicy fruity character in there. A little bit of raisiny sharpness, a little bit of plum, but then that very much fades away to give you that kind of like datey, Christmas puddingy type note further down. There's a lovely, you get a little bit of a kind of sultana, an oily peary character in the base there, but as you move to the middle of that front third of your palate, like I say, it's a wee bit more kind of figgy, and then in the front half of the front third of your palate, it's definitely black currant and blackberry on top. So yeah, I really do like how that kind of pieces together in this one. The fruity character really builds up and becomes really interesting actually. So yeah, I think this beer goes together really nicely in that sense. So yeah, I think that covers everything we really need to say about the flavour profile of this one. Let's round off then with a wee look at the mouthfeel. So generally speaking, I think it's difficult to describe this beer as anything other than being full-bodied. The carbonation is very smooth. It's not such a creamy beer, this one. It's kind of like silky, I guess you could say, in terms of its mouthfeel. In terms of the IBU character in this one, it's a little bit difficult to say. It does have a wee bit of bitterness to it, you know, maybe 50-ish IBUs, but you can always talk about calculated bitterness and perceived bitterness and so on. The beer does have an element of roasty toasty character to it. It does also have a little bit of dryness. The malt base, as we said, has the barrel, it has the spirit, it has the sweetness from the malt, it has a bit of dryness from the malty character as well, and generally speaking the sweetness that you get out of this beer is more of a drier sweetness, to be quite honest with you. But yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things, you're not getting much bitterness out of this beer, and the fruity character is a little bit phenolic and boozy, and yeah, you have a little bit of sweetness from that fruity side of things as well. Overall, I would say that it's a really interesting beer, this one actually. It's very much kind of straddling the border between Russian Imperial Stout on one hand and like an Imperial Milk Stout on the other, and it has obviously the kind of barrel-aged side of things to it as well. Yeah, so yeah, the way that this goes together is really quite nice actually. I like how this one pieces together. So yeah, the way that goes together for me is a really interesting one, and I'm really glad that Jesse gave me this beer to have a little look at. I can see why it's so highly rated. I can feel the booze go into my head a little bit because it is 17% triple mash. But yeah, really enjoyable beer, this one, and I'm going to go away and sip on the rest of this one and enjoy a film or something. I'll give a little bit to my dad as well, of course. But yeah, let's leave it there. This one was the Dragon's Milk Triple Mash 2019 vintage, incidentally. A triple mash bourbon barrel aged Imperial Stout at 17% ABV from New Holland Brewing Company in Holland, a little bit to the southwest of Grand Rapids in Michigan, over in the US. Again, a huge thank you to Jesse Holden for making this review possible. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from New Holland Brewing Company as well, and we will see about returning to these guys again at some point in the future. I do hope that I can go and visit one of their tap rooms actually. The original one would be where I would want to go, and we'll see about doing an out and about review at some point. That would be very cool to do that with Jesse, in fact. But yeah, the latest in my series of crazy beers for 10 years here on Rampant Lion Reviews. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out New Holland's social media, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skål, and cheers.